Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Gesha Village Lot 24118 Natural Processed Ethiopia from the Piggy Chemist. And there's the bag right there. And the Piggy Chemist, based out of Chaudfontaine, Belgium. And they've quickly become one of our most featured European coffee roasters on this channel. And that is largely because they have become a lot more accessible to us, as Airworks has brought them in on several occasions now. And as long as Airworks continues to bring them in and you guys are interested, then we will continue to review their coffee. That being said, I probably would have been interested in this coffee given that the most success I've had with this coffee roaster has usually been with their natural processed coffees, and given that their Gesha Village coffees are extremely popular, it's one I decided was worth trying out, so it'll be interesting to see how it turned out, as this right here is day 61. And recipe we went with for this coffee was the Piggy Chemist's recipe, which is a 16.67 to 1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 95 degrees Celsius, about 203 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the V60, which usually indicates a more medium fine grind. However, I went significantly more fine on that grind as well, as I found greater success going significantly finer in that sense. Now, roast profile for this coffee. Once again, I do believe that the Piggy Chemist had recently changed the descriptor of the profiles of their coffees, and this one is now one of their ultralight offerings, as in the past I believe that they had, Omni-Light and a filter profile, but once again, this one, they're ultralight, so it should be the lightest offering that they do have, and I can definitely say that this one continues to skew on the extremely light side of things, as this is one of the lighter roasted coffees that we have reviewed on this channel in a bit, as the Piggy Chemist does tend to offer some of the really light roasted coffees that we do review. So all of that's to say that this coffee is an extremely light profiled coffee by all standards, or most standards and metrics. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 30, first impression. So we did give it at least 4 weeks worth of rest. And quick side note, it is kind of interesting to me that the Piggy Chemist actually says that you can start brewing their coffee significantly earlier than that, though there's an entire recipe behind that. But we still usually opt to wait to at least that week 4 mark. And the coffee is interesting, as it's not particularly intense or heavy for a natural, but rather offering a uniquely clean floral experience. Listed rows did make a lot of sense, as the cup is expectedly red themed with some slight traces of red fruit qualities as well, but for the most part it had a very pretty presentation, maybe a little bit different from what I was expecting for this coffee, but I've had some impressions like this with the Piggy Chemist in the past where it's a little bit more tame based off of that first try, so it's going to be interesting to see where it would go from here. Day 33 through the Chemex, and the coffee continues to offer a cleaner experience with the focus remaining on the red aspects in a red berry and red floral sense. It's sweeter, but in a very even sense as well, so this coffee hasn't necessarily stood out too much in one specific direction outside of the red profile to it. A little bit of citric and herbal qualities to accompany an otherwise direct and relatively intense start. I have to say relatively intense because, again, I've had some very soft, subtle experiences from the Piggy Chemist in the past, but with this one being a natural, I oftentimes feel that that helps those initial impressions of this coffee roaster. Day 36 to the UFO brewer, and the coffee does continue to remain cleaner and a little bit more tame than expected, with the red fruit qualities presented in a very clean sense and a mostly red berry sense. So it's been pretty direct once again today. And these first initial impressions have been, for the most part, pretty consistent, pretty direct, as I feel like it's a number of factors, mostly that this is the direction that this coffee is meant to go, but also that this coffee probably needed either some time or adjustments because it wasn't necessarily lending itself towards any more intense of a first couple of tries. Day 39 through the V60 with the Piggy Chemist recipe, and it's a little toned down from some of the earlier experiences as well, which weren't particularly intense to begin with, as it does offer plenty of clarity for a natural coffee. Focus continues to remain on the red fruit and floral qualities with a slight tartness, giving additional citric depth and plenty of brightness to it as well. So at least I can say that I'm getting a little bit more brightness this time around, adding a little bit more depth to this coffee. Day 42 through the Chemex with the Piggy Chemist recipe. And interestingly enough, this is the best the coffee had been to this point, as it was offering a washed level of cleanliness with a cleaner red quality, including a better defined strawberry-like sense this time around. So getting much more of those red qualities, a little bit more definition to them this time around as well. Cleanliness or cleaner and sweeter citric qualities as well, with a nice level of sweetness and intensity without sacrificing any of the clarity whatsoever. And I'll be completely honest, I was a little worried that we were going to have the best results of this coffee with the Chemex, which is always funny because I know how much that bothers people. All right, it's day 45 through the V60 with the Picky Chemist's recipe and a bit more fine of a grind. And there's some mixed results as it's very nice off brew, offering a very clean representation once again, especially of a natural processed coffee with more of the red fruit qualities, lacking any sort of fermentiness. But the cool down did open up into a much more bright and prominent citric quality, with it being the most pronounced it had been up to this point. So I was at least happier given that there was more depth and additional intensity to this coffee, even if it was skewing a little bit more in a direction that isn't particularly my favorite. Day 48 to the Chemist with the same adjustments, and the coffee has been very, very consistent, almost to a fault, as it just has that very uniquely clean red profile to it with a washed level of cleanliness as well. The slight candied orange feel is a little bit more present today as well, so a little bit of additional depth. And on day 51, we opted for the V60 with the Picky Chemist recipe, and we went even more fine on the grind. And I felt like that was probably the issue we were having with this coffee, is that we just needed to keep going further on the dial with this coffee for the grind, as it was the best it had been to this point, with a little bit more intensity. And I was honestly just looking for more and more intensity, because I don't think the cleanliness and clarity of this coffee was ever in jeopardy. No funkiness or fermentiness with the red berry, as it's reminiscent of raspberry with a slight tartness to it, but it also offers a sweeter citrus in line with the listed blood orange. The primary focus, though, also remains on the red floral qualities, both in the listed rose and hibiscus, which is something I've got away from when discussing this coffee, mostly because they were ever present, but not something that was, I would say, ever overly intense, just the most prominent and consistent quality within this coffee. All right, so let's go ahead and put up our tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And as is the case when putting up the tasting wheel for the Picky Chemist, I have also pulled up the Picky Chemist's tasting wheel so I can kind of compare them side by side. But let's go through them. We'll start with the cleanliness, level 4. That's always a victory when it comes to a natural processed coffee, because I do have concerns that they might not necessarily be the cleanest, but that's usually the results I do have with the Picky Chemist's natural processed coffees, is that they're on the cleaner side of things. There really wasn't anything that could take away from the overall cleanliness whatsoever. If anything, I think it might have helped this coffee with the overall intensity, but it's a very clean coffee. And I don't quite recall, so fermentiness they have at a level 1. Honestly, it sounds like they got a little bit more fermentiness than I did, because I don't think that there's any fermentiness that could take away from the cleanliness in this coffee. Finish, level 4. And where did they put that, if they have a finish on this one? They don't, so I can say for this one, even though it's not necessarily the most intense coffee, it definitely did offer a lingering floral experience for us specifically, and at times that citric quality as well, so level 4 where we opted to put that. Sweetness, level 4, I think that they were somewhere in between a 3 and a 4, but for me, relative to some other Picky Chemist coffees we've had in the past, it's still on the sweeter side of things, maybe not to the same extent as some of those Mejorados, which were extremely sweet, but outside of that, I do have to say just a nice level of sweetness overall. I guess I scored it a little higher than them. Acidity, level 4, and I'm very curious, they also scored that somewhere between the 3 and the 4, so I guess I got a little bit more brightness for this coffee. It could be because we went a bit more fine on that grind, and that might have brought out a little bit more brightness in general, but I was also wavering somewhere between the 3 and the 4 because it's a softer brightness that's presented within this coffee, but I want to say prominent enough to the point where we felt it was justified at that level 4 mark. Florality, level 4. And that's one thing we definitely seem to agree on, is they definitely have the florals pretty high. I'm very happy to see that actually look at this tasting wheel. This is actually a live reaction to this tasting wheel, their tasting wheel, because I really don't know what the Picky Chemist puts up for theirs. And it's nice that we seem to agree. That's the most abundant quality I was getting with this coffee, was the florals. So very happy to see that we were on even footing with that. Berry fruit, level 4. And where did they put their berry fruits? And I think they have the red fruit berries at level 3, so they have it a little bit more toned down than I do. But given that this coffee had a very red theme throughout the entirety of it for us, and I said on some of the earlier days there was a very nice defined strawberry-like sense, but more often there was a bit more tart of a red berry quality, but it was the second most pronounced quality after the florality for us, so we opted to put it there at the level 4 mark, where they had a little lower level 3. Let's go ahead and move on to the level 3s. We have the citrus fruit level 3, and curious where they put that. They put it somewhere between the 3 and the 4. That's interesting. They had the citrus fruit scoring a bit higher than the berry qualities for them. I could see that. There were times where I felt like the citric qualities were shining a little bit more. They were a little bit more intense and pronounced than the berry fruit, but I do have to say I think the berry fruit was just a little bit more consistent for us. So a little bit of a differing opinion on that one. Body level 3, definitely plenty of texture for us, and I'm pretty sure that they have a body to texture. They have it between a 3 and a 4 as well, so I can agree with that. For a Gesha, it definitely had a little bit more body, a little bit more texture as well, so interesting. We agree a lot more on this tasting wheel than we have with any of the other tasting wheels we've had or discussed from them in the past. Outside of that, though, as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I don't think that there's anything else worth discussing. It's a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee, and it seems to be pretty close to what they were getting from this coffee as well. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. Throughout the entirety of my time working through this coffee, I couldn't help but shake the feeling that it reminded me so much of the other Gesha Village coffee that we had reviewed from the Picky Chemist, the other natural Ethiopian Gesha Village coffee, which was 24080, I want to say. So they were both from the, I guess, 24 part of the Gesha Village lot. So for that reason, I guess it's not too surprising they were very similar. Both had a lot of the cleaner red qualities to them. I looked at that tasting wheel before we started this review, and I saw that I scored the brightness a little lower and the sweetness a little higher for that coffee. So if anything, I probably enjoyed that coffee a little bit more than this one, but I thought that this one was very enjoyable. It's been pretty on par with a lot of the experiences I've had from the Picky Chemist in the past, which kind of seem to fall into this category of I enjoy them. They're very nice. They offer a lot of qualities to them. I just wish that there was maybe a little bit more intensity in general, a little bit more sweetness to them in general. The type of person I would suggest this coffee to. It's a very good representation of what a lot of the other coffees we've had from the Picky Chemist has been, is it's very clean, especially for natural. And I really want to hammer home that point, mostly because I don't want to say surprised at how clean it was, but I was happy with how clean it was, because there really wasn't anything I could do or mess with this coffee to get it to kind of go away from that very high level of cleanliness. So that's a very good aspect of this coffee. Very red themed, very red forward. I found that the floral presentation was very pretty. So especially if you like your red floral qualities to a coffee with less of the fermentiness, that's kind of a really nice direction. Definitely keep the extremely light profile of this coffee in mind as well. So that's the best direction I can point somebody towards on this one, and also the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love hearing your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Gesha Village Lot 24118, Natural Processed Ethiopia from the Picky Chemist. Thank you for watching.